My dad ignored me my whole life to worship my brother, but when my grandma died, she left me $880K only to me, and a letter that revealed the secret that destroyed my entire family and left them with nothing. I'm 27 years old. I work in tech for a company that basically makes software nobody understands, and I'm still not fully processing what happened like 6 months ago when my grandmother died and basically blew up my entire family. And when I say blew up, I mean it revealed secrets that had been buried for decades, and that explained why my life was the way it was. You know, why I always felt like the wrong son in my own house. I guess I should start at the beginning, or at least where I understand it all started. I grew up in upstate New York, a small town where everyone knows everyone and secrets are impossible to keep. Or so I thought. My dad is 52 now, my mom like 49, and my brother Cole is 30, so 3 years older than me. For as long as I can remember, Cole was the perfect son, the one who did everything right, the one my dad adored with an intensity that always seemed a little weird to me, but I never knew why. Like, it wasn't just that Cole was good at sports or got good grades, it was that my dad looked at him with this expression he never, ever used with me. Like Cole was the most valuable thing in the world and I don't know, a piece of furniture taking up space. I'm not gonna lie, my childhood was basically living in Cole's shadow. He played football. I tried to join the team, but my dad never came to watch me play. He was always busy with work or tired or whatever. Cole got A's, I got B's, and that was enough for my dad to say something like, "Well, at least you passed." Cole decided to study business administration, and my dad was so proud he cried, literal. He cried when Cole graduated. I got into programming because I liked it, and because, frankly, I didn't know what else to do. And my dad didn't even come to my graduation because he had a golf tournament with Cole that weekend. You know what I mean? It was that level of difference. My mom was always more emotionally distant, let's say. Not that she was a bad mother or anything, but she was never the affectionate type. Never the hugging or saying I love you or asking how you feel type. She was more the practical style, like, you have food, you have a house, you have clothes, that's it, you're lucky. And look, I guess she was right about that, but when you're a kid, you want more than just the basics, you know? You want someone to get excited when you come home or care about what you did during the day. But well, that never really happened with me. With Cole, yes, sure. With Cole, my mom at least tried. But with me, it was like she was fulfilling her duty, and that's it. The thing with my grandmother was interesting because she was always different with me. My paternal grandmother, my dad's mom, lived like 2 hours away from us, and we'd see her maybe 3 or 4 times a year, at Christmas, Thanksgiving, that kind of thing. But she always treated me special, not Cole. She'd pull me aside and ask me how I was, what I was learning, if I was happy. She'd send me letters, like handwritten letters, which nobody does anymore, and she'd always include like $20 or a small check with a note that said, "For my favorite Trevor." My dad always got weird when my grandmother did that, like uncomfortable or annoyed. I never understood why. Cole didn't understand either, and honestly complained that Grandma preferred me, which was ironic considering he was literally everyone else's favorite in the family. My grandfather, my dad's dad, died when I was like 5 years old. I don't remember him much, to be honest. What I do remember is that my dad almost never talked about him, and when he did, it was with this tension in his voice. Like there was something there he didn't want to touch. My grandmother didn't talk much about my grandfather either, which always seemed weird to me because supposedly they'd been married like 40 years before he died. But, well, families are weird and I was a kid. I didn't think too much about it. Fast forward to like 6 months ago, more or less. My grandmother was 86 years old and had been sick for a while, cancer or something. They never told me exactly what, but we knew she didn't have much time left. She still lived alone in this huge house that had been hers and my grandfather's, an old Victorian house in a town even smaller than where we grew up, with like 4 bedrooms and a giant yard that she kept immaculate until she couldn't anymore. When she died, it was relatively quick at the end. Like she was in the hospital for a week and then she was gone. We all went to the funeral, my dad, my mom, Cole, me, and my dad's 2 sisters, Aunt Clara and Aunt Linda, with their families. The funeral was normal, I guess. Sad, but not dramatic. My dad cried, which was weird to see because he's not one to show emotions, and Cole was there consoling him as always, being the perfect son. I stayed in the back, basically, watching everything, and feeling that familiar sensation of not really belonging even though technically it was my family. 2. After the funeral, there was a reception at my grandmother's house, with food and people talking about how wonderful she was, and I just wanted to go to my apartment and be alone, but I stayed because it seemed like the right thing to do. 2 days later, I got a call from a lawyer, Mr. Thompson or something like that. I don't remember his full name. He told me my grandmother had requested that I be present at the private reading of her will, along with my dad and his sisters. Cole wasn't invited, which seemed strange to me, but I thought maybe it was because wills only include direct children or something. I don't know how it works legally. The lawyer was very specific that it had to be me personally, that my grandmother had put it in writing with my full name and everything. I went to the lawyer's office like 3 days later, in an old building in downtown where my grandmother lived. My dad was already there, with Aunt Clara and Aunt Linda, and everyone looked tense. My dad looked at me weird when I walked in, like, "What are you doing here?" But he didn't say anything. The lawyer started reading the will, and basically it said that my grandmother's house, which was valued at like $600,000, according to the most recent appraisal, plus other assets that added up to like $250,000, would be divided among the heirs in a specific way. Aunt Clara and Aunt Linda each received 1/3. That was expected. But the third part, the one that corresponded to my dad as a son, didn't go to my dad. It went to me. The room went absolutely silent. My dad went pale. Literal, I saw the blood drain from his face. Aunt Clara and Aunt Linda looked at each other with an expression I couldn't decipher, like they knew something I didn't know. The lawyer continued, explaining that my grandmother had been very specific that this portion was for me, Trevor, and that under no circumstances should it be shared or redistributed unless I decided to do so voluntarily, but that she trusted I would make the right decisions with that inheritance. My dad exploded. He started yelling that this didn't make sense, that his mother clearly wasn't in her right mind when she made that will, that I had no right to anything because it was his inheritance as a son. The lawyer stayed calm and said that my grandmother had made this will 5 years ago, when she was perfectly lucid, and that it had been reviewed and updated several times, the last time just a year ago. He said there were medical evaluations proving that my grandmother was mentally competent when she made those decisions. My dad kept yelling, and Aunt Clara finally told him to shut up. That mom knew what she was doing, that he should respect her wishes. That only made my dad angrier. After the official reading ended, the lawyer asked me to stay for a moment. My dad left furious, without even looking at me. And my aunts left too, but not before Aunt Clara squeezed my shoulder and told me quietly, "She loved you very much, Trevor. Make decisions that make you happy." I didn't understand what she meant at that moment, but later, everything would make sense. The lawyer closed the door when we were alone and took out an envelope from his desk. It was a white envelope, sealed, with my name written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. He told me my grandmother had given him specific instructions to give me this after the will, reading, that it was only for me, that no one else should read it unless I decided to share it. He gave it to me and told me to take my time, that I could read it there or take it with me, whatever I preferred. I decided to take it with me because honestly I needed to get out of there. The atmosphere was too tense and my head was chaos. I went back to my apartment, which is like an hour from where my dad lives, and sat on the couch with the envelope in my hands for, I don't know, like 30 minutes, without opening it. I knew that whatever was in there was going to change something. I could feel it. I finally opened it and pulled out like 3 handwritten pages with my grandmother's handwriting that I knew so well from all those letters she sent me. I started reading and literal, my entire life started making sense in a way it never had before. The letter started by saying she loved me, that she had always loved me, especially because I was the only true grandson she had from my dad. Then she explained something no one had ever told me, something that apparently the whole family knew except me and, apparently, Cole. Turns out when my mom met my dad, she was already 3 months pregnant. Cole is not my dad's biological son. My mom was dating some other guy, got pregnant. The guy disappeared or left her or something. And then she met my dad, who decided to stay with her and raise Cole as his own. My grandmother wrote that my grandfather, when he found out about this, was furious. He told my dad he was making the biggest mistake of his life by raising another man's child, that he was going to ruin his future, that the family was going to suffer because of it. My dad didn't listen and married my mom anyway. My grandfather, according to the letter, never forgave my dad for that decision. He basically disowned my dad, told him that as long as he raised that child who wasn't his, as if he were his son, he wouldn't have a son either. My grandmother was devastated, but my grandfather was stubborn and traditional. One of those old school men who, when they make a decision, there's no going back. Years went by without them talking. When I was born, 2 years later, my grandmother saw me as her opportunity to have a true grandson from her son. She started maintaining contact with me in secret. Well, not so secret, but not with my grandfather's full approval either. My grandfather died without reconciling with my dad, taking that resentment to his grave. The letter explained that my grandmother always knew my dad favored Cole in an unhealthy way. She believed it was because my dad was trying to compensate for the fact that Cole wasn't biologically his, trying to prove to the world, or maybe to my dead grandfather or to himself, that he could love that child even more than his biological son. But in the process, he made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter. My grandmother wrote that she had tried to talk to my dad about this several times, but he refused to listen, got angry, said she didn't understand, that both children were equal to him even though they clearly weren't. At the end of the letter, my grandmother explained that she was leaving me that inheritance because she felt I deserved something that was only mine, something no one could take away or make less. She said she trusted I would use that money to build a life that made me happy, away from Cole's shadow if that's what I needed. She also said, and this broke me, that she felt she had failed by not being able to make my dad treat me better, but that at least in death she could give me this validation, this proof that someone had seen and valued me for who I was. I sat on that couch crying I don't know how long. It was like all the pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was putting together suddenly fit. My dad's extreme favoritism toward Cole, the tension with my grandfather that was never explained, my grandmother's special treatment of me. It all made sense now. And the worst part, or maybe the most liberating, was that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't that I was less worthy, or less lovable, or less whatever. It was that my dad was so obsessed with proving he could be the perfect father to the son who wasn't his, that he forgot to be a father to the son who was his. My phone started ringing that same night. It was my dad, call after call after call. I didn't answer any of them. He sent me text messages saying we needed to talk, that what my grandmother did wasn't right, that we had to fix it. Cole also wrote me, saying that family should divide everything, equitably, that grandma was probably confused at the end, that it wasn't fair that I received everything and he got nothing when we were brothers. The irony of that message, considering I now knew the truth, was almost comical. I ignored them both for like a week. I needed time to process everything, to decide what I was going to do. The inheritance was an amount of money that would change my life. We're talking about like $280,000 total after selling the house and liquidating everything. I could pay off my student loans, buy an apartment, maybe start a business, things I had always dreamed of but seemed impossible with my normal salary. But I also knew that accepting this was going to cause an earthquake in my family, or what was left of it. Finally, like 2 weeks after the funeral, my dad and Cole showed up at my apartment without warning. They rang the doorbell on a Sunday morning. I was in sweatpants and an old t-shirt. I hadn't even showered yet. I opened the door and there they were. My dad, with that face he makes when he's trying to control his anger, and Cole with an expression of, I didn't do anything wrong. They came in without me really inviting them, and my dad immediately started with how we needed to talk about the inheritance, that it couldn't be that I was going to keep everything, that we had to divide it between him and me, or better yet, among the three of us. I told them Grandma had been very clear in her wishes, and that I was going to respect them. My dad said my grandmother was senile, that she clearly didn't know what she was doing. I reminded him that the lawyer had medical documents proving otherwise, and that besides, my aunts had received their shares without problem, so clearly the will was valid. Cole jumped in saying he had always been my brother, that we grew up together, that how could I be so selfish to keep everything? I told them Do you really want to talk about being brothers? You want to talk about family? Because I spent my whole life being treated like I was less than Cole, like I didn't matter, like I was a burden instead of a son. I told them my dad never went to any of my games, never celebrated my achievements, never looked at me with even half the pride he looked at Cole with. I told them Cole never had to fight for attention or approval because he had it all. Always, no matter what. I told them that now, for the first time in my life, someone had decided that I mattered more, and I wasn't going to apologize for that. My dad turned red, furious, saying I was being dramatic, that he had treated us both equally, that I was making things up. Cole looked uncomfortable but backed my dad, saying maybe I was jealous or resentful for no reason, that he had never done anything bad to me. I told them to leave my apartment and not come back, unless they were willing to be honest, really honest, about how things had been. They left, my dad slamming the door and Cole following him, without saying anything else. 2 days later, my dad came alone. He knocked on the door softer, without Cole this time, and when I opened it, he looked tired, older than I remembered. He asked if we could talk for real. No yelling, no pressure. I let him in, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee that neither of us really drank. He told me he understood. I felt I'd been treated differently, but that I had to understand he had done the best he could with both of us. I asked him if he knew why Grandma had left that inheritance specifically to me. He was quiet for a long while and then said yes, he had an idea. I showed him the letter. I told him I already knew the truth about Cole, that Grandma had told me everything. I saw his face go through like 1,000 emotions: surprise, shame, anger, sadness. He read the whole letter, slowly, and when he finished, he just stared at the pages like he couldn't believe what he'd just read. He asked me how long I'd known, and I told him since the will reading that it was the first time anyone had told me the truth about our family. I expected him to deny everything, or get angry, but instead he started crying. My dad, this man who almost never shows emotions, started crying there in my kitchen. He said my grandfather had been so hard on him, so cruel when he decided to stay with my mom and raise Cole. He said he spent years trying to prove to my grandfather, even after he was dead, that he had made the right decision, that he could be a good father to Cole, a better father than my grandfather had been to him. He admitted, for the first time, that he had probably overcompensated, that he had neglected our relationship in the process. He said he was sorry but didn't know how to fix it now. I asked him if he had ever considered telling me the truth about Cole. He said no, that for him Cole was his son in every way that mattered, and that telling me would only cause problems. I told him that keeping that secret had caused more problems than telling the truth, that I had grown up feeling like something was wrong with me when really I was just caught in the middle of his need to prove something. He went quiet after that, had no answer. I told him I wasn't going to share the inheritance with him or Cole, that for the first time in my life I had something that was only mine, something someone had given me because they valued me, and I was going to respect myself enough to keep it. I told him maybe someday we could have a different relationship, a more honest one, but that for now I needed distance. He left without saying much more, just that I should think about it and that family was important. Like 2 weeks later, I received a legal notification. My dad and Cole had hired a lawyer to contest the will. They were claiming my grandmother wasn't in her right mind when she made it, that she had been influenced or manipulated, basically any argument they could use to nullify her decisions. I hired my own lawyer, using part of the inheritance money, ironically, and the legal process began. The case went to court like 3 months later. It was horrible. My dad and Cole sitting on one side with their lawyer, me on the other with mine, my aunts there too, but on the defense side of the will, saying their mother had been mentally perfect until the end. Aunt Clara testified that my grandmother had talked to her many times about her reasons for structuring the inheritance that way, that it was a conscious and deliberate decision based on years of watching how they treated me. Aunt Linda confirmed the same. My dad's lawyer tried to argue that my aunts were biased because they had also received money, but the judge didn't give much weight to that. They presented my grandmother's medical evaluations, interviews with her doctors, everything proving she was mentally competent. The judge reviewed everything, heard the arguments, and basically said the will was clear, that it had been done correctly, following all legal procedures, and that my grandmother's wishes should be respected. Case closed. My dad and Cole lost, and they had to pay the legal costs for both sides because the judge considered their lawsuit frivolous. Cole reached out to me after the final ruling was issued. He wrote asking to meet at a coffee shop, without my dad, just the two of us. I agreed because, I don't know, I guess part of me still wanted to believe there could be some brotherly relationship there, even though everything was a mess. We met at a Starbucks near my work. Neutral, public. Cole looked bad, like dark circles under his eyes, thinner, stressed. He told me he didn't understand why Grandma had preferred me so much, that he had always tried to be a good grandson too, that it wasn't fair I got to keep everything just because. I asked him if he really wanted to know the truth. He said yes. I took out a copy of my grandmother's letter from my backpack and gave it to him. I told him to read that and then tell me if he still thought there was no reason for Grandma's decisions. I watched him read the letter, watched his expression change from confusion to shock to something like horror. When he finished, he just sat there, staring at the paper, not saying anything for like 5 full minutes. Finally, he asked me if it was true. I told him according to Grandma, yes, and that it explained a lot about how we'd been raised. He asked me if Dad knew. I told him Dad had always known, that Mom and Dad had decided together never to tell him. Cole stood up and left without saying anything else, leaving the letter on the table. I didn't hear anything from him for like 2 weeks, and then Aunt Clara told me Cole had moved out of my parents' house, that he was living with a friend, that he wasn't answering my dad's calls. Apparently, Cole confronted my dad and Mom about the letter, demanded the truth, and when they confirmed it was real, he basically told them he needed space to process that a whole life had been a lie. I haven't heard much from Cole since then. He wrote me once, like a month later, saying he was still angry about the inheritance but understood better now why things had been the way they were. He said he needed time away from the whole family to figure out who he really was, outside of being the favorite son or the son who wasn't really a son. I didn't respond because honestly I didn't know what to say. My dad has called me a few times but I don't answer. He leaves voicemails that I delete without listening. My mom wrote me once, asking if we could talk, but I told her I wasn't ready. My aunts call me every now and then to see how I am. They're the only ones in the family I still really talk to. I used the inheritance money to pay off my student loans, bought a small but decent apartment, and I'm in the process of starting my own tech consulting business, something I always wanted to do, but never had the capital to start. I sold my grandmother's house like 4 months ago. It was weird being there, knowing it was mine, knowing she had wanted me to have it. I stayed for a few hours the day before closing the sale, walking through the empty rooms, thanking out loud a grandmother who was no longer there but who had given me more than money. She had given me validation and truth. I don't know if I'll ever reconcile with my dad or Cole. Part of me wants to believe yes, that someday we can have honest conversations and build something new, but another part of me, the part that grew up feeling invisible and insufficient, isn't sure I want that. The truth is, I'm okay now. Better than I've been in a long time. I have my own space, my own money, my own plans that don't depend on anyone else's approval or attention. Sometimes I feel guilty, like, should I have shared some of the inheritance just to keep the peace? But then I remember all those years where no one shared their attention or love with me equitably, and the guilt goes away. My grandmother gave me a gift not just of money but of liberation. The liberation from continuing to chase something I was never going to receive from my family. And that, honestly, is worth more than any amount of money. Last week, I was organizing my things and found one of those old letters my grandmother used to send me when I was a kid. It said something like, "Trevor, remember that your value doesn't depend on how others see you, but on who you decide to be." At the time, it was just a nice grandma phrase, but now I understand it differently. She knew, she always knew, that I was going to need that reminder, and she gave it to me in every way she could while she was alive, and one more time after she died. I don't have a happy movie-type ending where we all hug and forgive everything. I'm still processing the anger, the sadness, the confusing relief of finally understanding why my life was the way it was. But I have something I never had before. I have clarity, I have resources, and I have a possibility of building a life that isn't defined by my father's favoritism or my family's secrets. And I guess that's enough for now. It's more than I had 6 months ago, and definitely more than I thought I'd ever have.